All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the LPEA Board of Directors meeting for December. Let's go ahead as we usually do. Let's start. Please ask everybody to stand and for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Terrific, thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and call this meeting. So we call the meeting order, and sorry, juggling a bunch of stuff here. Okay, great. Yeah, so call the meeting order. We need an approval. We need a motion to approve the agenda. Anyone?
Fuller will make the motion to approve the agenda with one change. I would like to change under 10, or excuse me, under number 9 reports, to move number 6, the Tri-State Rate Committee report, after Tri-State report and before the Fast Track Communications Board, please.
Terrific. Can I get a second for that?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? I'll hand up and say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're right. The agenda passes as modified, and caller remind me of that because my short-term memory is trash. And I will not remember that in an hour. Okay, let's go ahead and open the floor for member comments.
And John, you want me to give our member comment statement quickly?
Please do. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you. The board encourages comments about the cooperative from its members. The board asks each participant's comments pertain to cooperative business. Those wanting to address the board during the public comment period are granted 5 minutes to address their topics. Lengthy comments to the board should be submitted in writing. Formal complaints must be filed in writing and submitted in compliance with applicable board policy. Comments from the public will be directed to the entire board, not to any individual. No personal attacks will be allowed. Failure to follow these requirements may cause the public comment period to be terminated. Copies of our policies and procedures on public comment and complaints are available at our website.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Okay, let's the floor is open for member comments. Let's give people a moment. Okay, with no member comments, let's move forward. We have we need a motion to approve the consent board items. However, correct me if I'm speaking out of turn. We are going to go ahead and pull. John Lee has an expense in your packet that we're going to go ahead and pull out as it had some clerical errors, and he'll resubmit that in January. But other than that, can we get a motion to approve the consent board items?
So moved by Kohler.
Thank you, Kohler, and I saw a second from Kirsten. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? All abstained? Okay, consent board items passed. Thank you. Let's go ahead and turn the mic over to Jessica for the CEO and staff reports.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Drew's going to share his screen. Okay, this is the November 2022 dashboard. Go ahead. Okay, we have all green check marks except for a few on reliability. And as we've reported, these are averages, so they are lower due to the past storms for the year. But the numbers are getting better. And so we anticipate these to be all green checks for the month of December when we will report in January. So we're hoping on that. Any questions on that slide? Okay. This is a fun picture. We helped sponsor one of the Lego robotics clubs teams, and that's the team. And actually Dan Harms was the lead team for our LPEA team that we also had sponsored. Those pictures were previously different dashboards, so this is a different team. But thanks to Dan Harms and Carl, they were both judges at this event, so that was very fun. Okay, our next slide. We did have one accident report. It was a fender bender, and this is definitely unfortunate. No one was hurt. This is a small fender bender with one of our line workers. And so again, we take these as opportunities to remind people about safe driving, look through our policies to make sure that we're clear on even cell phones, the use of those. This was not the case in this one, but as I mentioned to you, we do like to go ahead and report these and use these as opportunities for improvement. The other thing I just wanted to highlight on this is our cybersecurity tabletop exercise. Drew, do you just want to give a few words on that one?
Yeah, happy to. So this is our first cybersecurity tabletop exercise we've done at LPEA, and we simulated a ransomware attack, and it was really interesting. So it kind of started off with a couple of workstations kind of acting up, being slow, and then kept escalating. We were getting messages on screens demanding a ransom, and so we had to make decisions like, do we shut down enterprise systems knowing that was going to impact the business, but in order to keep them from being infected, and things like when to contact law enforcement and our cyber insurance provider. So anyway, it was a really good exercise, and definitely appreciate everybody from LT who attended. And then a special thanks to Trent Weber, our safety specialist, for facilitating the exercise. So it was really good.
Yeah, and thanks, Drew. And this was out of the cybersecurity strategy that we worked on this past year with the consultants that we reported on. So this is a cyber hygiene measure that we will do every year. And if not once, maybe twice even with different scenarios. So this just gets us ready to understand what we don't know. And not only is this great for understanding what would happen if there's a cyber attack, but the ultimate thing that this does is it actually could turn off power. And so this not only helps us with reliability and resiliency in a cyber attack, but even in a big storm. It's the same activities that we would take in case our radios all went down, dispatch went down, those things. So it's a really good opportunity. And also, I just wanted to mention, over Thanksgiving, we did have a phone scam go out to people's private cell phones. Someone on the board got that. Really appreciated Sue to alert us right away. It was on Thanksgiving, so you will notice that hackers and phone scam folks are starting to hit people during holiday season because you're distracted. So just to let you know, if anything comes through that's from myself as an emergency, or even one of you, I think the key is to alert Drew and his team or myself right away, just as Sue did, and we'll look into it. Or even call the person, not the phone number, but call the board member with the phone number. Don't ever respond back to the person texting you, because that most likely would be a cyber scam. So we appreciate people's vigilance on that. Joe, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say the construction map app or link, I think it's a great idea. So a lot of times you see a bunch of trucks, it's like, what's going on? And so I think it's a great idea. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, next slide. Okay, thanks again for all the board members that were involved in the Fill the Bucket food drive. As you can see, we had a large turnout, so that was fantastic. And then we also appreciate the board contributing to the Giving Tree. We still have that open, so if no one has contributed, I thought it was very clever that Hillary and her team created a scan so that you can go ahead and scan the Venmo and then you can contribute that way. So that is still open. Sunnyside, as you see that, we've ordered the solar panels, which will arrive this month. So we are still working on that. It's been positive. Okay, Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious how the fill the bucket did compared to last year.
Hillary, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we had a record amount in Durango and just slightly under in Pagosa, but overall it was a record amount raised.
Do you know
Thank you.
by how much, Hillary? I'm just curious.
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I could find them.
Yeah.
And then who was the winner? Which group? Just to mention that.
Oh, don't say that.
I know it wasn't my group.
I know it was mine.
Okay. Mine was second place. All right. Thanks again. Those are fun events. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's see. Lots going on with broadband, as you all would imagine, and the grants. So I'll have Dan give a quick update on the broadband partnerships, but I did want to mention that Dominic May on our staff is working with Hillary and her team and Carl on all these grants coming down the pipe for us. And so Dominic has created a spreadsheet with those. So I will send those out today so the board knows what we're applying for and a little bit of detail, because there's a lot going on. It gets a little confusing. So Dan, do you want to give a quick update on broadband?
Sure. Yeah, there's multiple things going on, and Region 9, Region 10 are largely taking a lead on a lot of those efforts to step one being create regional redundancy, long haul and middle mile links throughout the state. And so one of those sections, there's a four-way partnership between La Plata Electric, La Plata County, Archuleta County, and Southern Ute to create complete a path from Ignacio, actually go all the way from Durango to Pagosa Springs and connect to the CDOT fiber that they're bringing over Wolf Creek right now. And so that will complete a loop in the Southern Colorado region, provide a ton of redundancy for the 911 aspects. We have successfully acquired a grant for that, and trying to work through the agreement on that end of it, just as far as what fibers are owned by which partners and to what extent that goes through. So Tim, you have a question there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to cut you off.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that this extends into Durango. So I would be curious to understand how it gets into Durango, where it terminates, and things like that. It doesn't have to be done here, but maybe I haven't seen this grant document at all. I would really appreciate being able to understand a little more of that and LPEA's participation in it. So maybe you could take a note and send me some info, or we could talk later.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it was all the way to Durango, so that's a.
And I'll be clear on part of this, because this sort of evolved here pretty recently, because my understanding it was from Ignacio to the outskirts of Pagosa.
Right.
And that's where the new build is occurring. To get to Durango has to use existing assets. So the tribe is putting in existing line right now that could be wrapped into this. So I'm trying to figure that out as well, Tim. So when we get and a lot of these comes out in the terms, because there was an assumption that they were going to use our fiber that went from the Pirelli Ranch over to Highway 84. And that was the first time I'd seen that, to make that connectivity happen. And it's like, well, if that's going to happen, then that has to be a contribution from LPEA to the project and work through those terms. So we have some assets that could be used, and there's a lot that we could stand to gain from this line being in as well. So we'll try to, as soon as we get some of those details, we'll get them over to you.
Right. I mean, there's also access issues on all these different partners, lines and so forth. So I think it behooves us to have a discussion about this before we ink any more agreement, so that we assure ourselves of the kind of access that we would want for our members. So,
Yep, that's a
yeah.
definitely work in progress there. Then in addition to that, there's other grants that are being pursued as part of NTIA grants to do, and these are more in the conceptual stage at this point. I know the letters of interest have been posted, but the official grants have not yet been formalized yet. So, but that would be looking for partners to create last mile type of solutions there. So that's a update on what's called things broadband for right now.
All right, so more to come on that broadband grant information, Tim. All right.
Great.
Any other questions? This is a great picture. We had a Wealthy contest where we asked employees to submit pictures of themselves doing healthy activities. And so Baker, he's one of our dispatch folks, took this picture, which made us all jealous because of his wonderful exploits. So, okay, were there any other questions on the dashboard in the appendix or anything else?
Just a quick question, Jessica. Where's he hiking there? He's mountaineering there somewhere.
Hillary, do you, or does any, Elizabeth, do you know?
It's a great picture.
Yeah.
He gets around. He's
He
quite
gets
a
her-
lot
I
of
didn't know
adventures
either.
under his belt.
Yeah, pick your spot, right?
He's actually our go-to person for like where to go on a really cool hike
I
besides.
bet.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, Kohler, did you have a question?
I do. So looking at page, I have it on 29 of 85. The and it shows for November that it's below the goal line that we're shooting for. And I think that represents how many members. So are there fewer members in November? And then when I look at the next page, which is the minutes, it's up and touching the goal. So am I correct to think that we're having fewer outages, but they're longer in duration? Is that kind of what that's saying?
I'll let Jerry answer that one.
That's a good interpretation of it. And the biggest reason is just the maintenance. We're having to take more scheduled outages to get some of our Raptor protections and reject pole changeouts.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions. Carl will start his finance report.
Thanks, Jessica. Forgive me, I'm a little scratchy today, but I will do my best. Let me just share my screen real quick for you guys. Oh, it's doing that thing again, isn't it? That better?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, November financials. So we've got lots of green ticks today. Everything met the board's financial goals. Cash reserves were only just, as we mentioned last month, we are getting a little low. We are seeing that we haven't borrowed for over 5 years now, and we are trying not to, as far as possible, with the interest rates so high. So we're just being very careful in that sphere right now, but we are above the board's goal of 12% at the end of November, and as we stand in December, we will be at the end of the year as well, per our models. So Tim raised a question yesterday regarding why are we not having any short-term investments, and the reason is because cash during the month can get kind of tight, and we don't want it caught up in 30-day commercial paper. We want it to be in our liquid funds throughout the month. And one of the reasons we have funds in the commercial paper accounts was to differentiate them, to show these are our funds that offset our rate stabilization fund, which is also down in our liabilities. But you don't actually have to have that. You just have to have the cash. But for the sake of presentation, when our cash was plentiful, I always like to have those as offsetting amounts. But that's not actually compulsory. It's just a nice presentation point. So if that makes sense. Everything else, long-term debt, equity, MDSC, comfortably above where we need it to be, or below, in which case. So looking at our highlights for the month. So our first one, we actually had operating costs slightly higher than we had forecast, and I will explain that. For our regular ongoing costs, we were around 100,000 below forecast. We did get hit with $150,000 relating to the Camus DER platform. This was actually an error in the finance department, which I apologize. When we first purchased this back in 2021, it's it's software, it's not something you can touch, but we mistakenly believed we had purchased an asset and capitalized it. But from day one, all we had bought was a license that you just have to keep renewing each year. And as we were going through our pre-audit process and making sure we didn't have any work orders that work in progress that was inaccurate, Monica checked this with Dominic, and he said, no, that's not how that should be presented. So we went and checked in with Forvis, which is the new name for BKD, our auditors, and they agreed that what we should do is write it off. Tim asked the question, should you go and change last year? And although it's $150,000, that's a big amount of money. That was not sufficiently high for them to think that we should go and change last year. You really need to be in around the $500,000 mark for them to be thinking you should do that. So that's why our operating costs look above forecast this month, is to correct that error that we made by capitalizing a software license. So everything else looked, fine and dandy. Labor costs were very close to forecast. Delinquent accounts, very low indeed. They're actually coming down again, and I think that's we're seeing the giving tree having a really big impact there. So that's, it's nice, and it's nice to see people who are struggling really benefiting from that. So that's down to about 0.02 at the moment in the middle of December. Electric sales, very strong month. Pretty much every category was above forecast. I think that was mainly temperature, Dan, wasn't it? And industrials, some of that went back online that we weren't anticipating as well. So gross margins were very strong. Remember, gross margins are sales less cost of power. And our operating margin, despite that snafu in costs, was $122,000 above forecast. So I see a couple of questions, and I think Kirsten was first. Kirsten.
Thanks, Carl. I'm sorry you have a scratchy throat. I hope that gets better for you.
Thank you.
Two questions on this slide. One, the first one you were talking about, the software license. So I get it, and we corrected it. Now, is that $150,000 a year going to be, is that the cost for our yearly subscription to that?
That's right, isn't it, Dan? I can see you nodding. Yes.
Okay, and is that reflected in our budget?
Yes.
Okay, so it got reflected in our budget, but we just, as an expense, as opposed to as a capital item.
Correct.
Okay, good, cool. And then my second question is about the delinquent accounts. And at what point do we start counting an account as delinquent?
When it's 60 days overdue.
Days overdue, okay, super. And the reason I've been thinking about delinquent accounts lately is, as you know, in our consent items, we have a page or two of people who were having to write off bad debts because they didn't. And then I guess they left. So that doesn't seem to be going down in number at all.
No, that's true.
So it's interesting that we've got this nice low delinquent accounts, but we have still, 2 pages worth of, or whatever that amount is, of folks who don't pay their bill to the point that when they leave, we take it out of their patronage. Any comments on that?
No, that's an ongoing problem. Delinquent accounts for active members are very, very low, and we see that every month. But when people either leave the service territory, and we do have quite a transient population in Durango, they are very reluctant to pay their bill. And unfortunately, there's not a huge amount you can do about it. So whatever we can get from their patronage, we do. And then a lot does get written off, unfortunately. I mean, it's not a huge amount in dollars, but you see it's a fairly substantial list.
Okay. So it's basically, I'm going to leave town. I'm just not going to bother. They can come find me.
Yeah, I mean, some people do, if they value, their credit rating, they will. But if you're already, at 400 or whatever, you're like, whatever.
So this does hit their credit report?
Yes.
Super. Excellent. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you, Kirsten. Kohler did have his hand up, but it seems to have gone down. Okay. I think that's all for me for now. Jessica, back to you. Let me.
Okay. John, back to you.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So we have a couple of board action agenda items. These should feel familiar to everybody. We talked about a couple of them last month, but let's go ahead. And who wants to drive the first one? Finance and Audit Committee update leading up to the a request for action.
I think that's going to be me with Carl's help. And before we to that memorandum, that I just wanted to let everybody know that in December, the Finance and Audit Committee did not meet as there was very little information available. But we will be meeting in January, and that will be on January the 12th. And we'll be discussing that audit process. So if you can hop in on board with that, that would be great. I'm not sure the time yet, but typically we meet about 9. And then I do have a quick question, and you guys can email me or think about it and then respond. But I did talk to the auditors a little bit about our audit process, and historically, our auditors have not reached out to other board members. It's been basically the treasurer and then staff. But in my prior directorship at Empire, then they did send out just a little questionnaire to all of the directors wanting to, they'd ask 3 or 4 questions. Have you seen any indication of any kind of embezzlement? Are you concerned about, whatever items there were? It was a very short survey that the auditor sent out. And so when I talked to Forfus about that, they said that they would be happy to do that same thing if the board desired that. So just think about it, but let me know if that is something we feel like we would like to do. Again, we don't have to answer that specifically today, but that audit process will be, it's already started, as Carl kind of alluded to, but we will be discussing that in January. So that is that, unless somebody has questions. Kohler, do you have a question still? It's probably about Carl's.
Yeah, I was before you started, so I need to ask Carl a question when you're finished.
That's fine.
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have managed that. Go ahead.
I mean, Kohler, sorry.
Oh, Okay, so my question is for Carl on the financials, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to it quick enough before you finished, Carl, but on page 48 of 85, the statement of operations, down under, in the last part, you have the non-operating margins, and for the month, it was a negative $5,000. I was wondering if I could just get a quick explanation on what that represents.
Yeah, am I no, I'm not muted. Yeah, I believe, Carla, that was, we sold an asset and actually made a loss on it. But let me check that one and I will give you the full details by email. But I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, caller. Back to you, Sue. Sorry, I should go ahead, please. Sue.
Yeah, that's fine. On page 58 of our board packet, there is a memorandum from Carl regarding the rate stabilization fund. And this is something that the Finance and Audit Committee had discussed in our October meeting. I thought that staff was going to send out an email to all of the directors kind of explaining why we wanted to increase that rate stabilization fund, and it is kind of addressed here in this memorandum. But we wanted to make sure that no one had questions on that before we went ahead and voted on that today.
And Sue, if you'd like, Carl can give more context.
That's perfect. Okay,
Okay.
Carl, love you to do that.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Jessica. So when we were looking at this, I believe it was Tim brought up the idea, whether it was in the board meeting or the FAC, about bringing up the rate stabilization fund to a number closer to $7 million so that we had a buffer against possible rate increases from our G&T or some kind of, catastrophic event that would put our financial results in jeopardy from meeting our financial goals and, of course, our covenants with CFC. Now, we are not exactly sure of what's going to happen next year with our electric rates. We discussed it during the budget that, I know Kirsten probably has as good an idea as anybody being on the rate committee, but the things are happening, and we would like to basically insulate the members from that risk by building up the rate stabilization fund to a degree where we are not looking at rate pressure for us next year or in the first half of 2024. And we can do that in this year by making an entry to our books in December where we would decrease our operating margins by $2.75 million. It'll be a very, transparent entry. It'll be a one-line entry on our income statement saying rate stabilization fund, revenue deferred, 2.75 million. It would reduce our operating margin by that amount. The balance would then go to rate stabilization and increase it to very close to that $7 million. I mean, we have been building it up over the last, close to 3 years that I've been here. So, but in doing that, we would still meet all of the financial goals this year. We would meet our loan covenant. We obviously would not meet our operating margin budget that that you guys voted on for 2022 would be about $1 million light there. And the impact to the members, I think that's the most important thing. They would not be looking at a rate increase in 2023 or the first half of 2024. And we could see how long that would go. It really depends on what Tri-State does.
Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
We'd also, the only thing that the downside to them is they'd have less allocated to them for 2022, which means less cash in 2042. And in these current like uncertain times, I know myself as a member, although I'm obviously biased because I'm pushing for this entry, I would rather have, you know, certainty on my rates in 2023 rather than a few bucks in 2042. So that is really the thrust of why we think this is a good idea.
And Carl, can you address the actual payout of capital credits versus the allocations?
Right. So we allocate 2022 in the spring next year once the auditors are finished and we've filed Form 7. That doesn't mean any cash is going out to the members at that point. We do, when we do a LIFO retirement, we may be looking at retiring some 2022 patronage, but we can still do that because 2022 patronage will still exist. And so we will mostly do FIFO as we usually do. And that will not be impacted by this measure whatsoever. Cash will still go out to those members who've got patronage outstanding from the early 2000s. If we do a LIFO, if you guys vote on that, that will not be affected because there will still be patronage capital from 2022, just not as much.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that even though it will affect the allocation of capital credits, it will not, it won't have any detrimental effect on the actual pay of capital credits.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sue.
I see Tim has a comment or question.
Yeah, I move that we direct staff to increase the rate stabilization fund by 2.75 million, reducing the operating margins for 2022 to a level that meets the financial goals, but is lower than the budgeted 2022 margin.
I heard a second from Ted. Okay, let's get this. Okay, so now we're gonna restrict the conversation down to Tim's motion.
I think
So
here's
yeah, Sue, why don't you go ahead and keep driving?
okay, here's some questions.
Yeah. Discussion on the LIFO, FIFO. So it is indeed a reduction. And if we do LIFO, as we did during the crunch for COVID, and I thought that was really great because it's like, okay, there's immediate pain. Let's get some cash out there. There's definitely immediate pain right now with the way inflation is. This is always a balance. You know, do we, you know, pay me now, pay me later? It's interesting. I'm speaking in favor of this motion, and at the same time, I acknowledging that this will mean less money in the hands of our members, and that's our job to evaluate that risk and say, okay, is it going to be better that we don't raise rates in 2023, or is it better that we give them a little cash through a LIFO right now? And it will be a little less cash. It'll be $1 million less in that margin. So just acknowledging that, and I am speaking in favor of the motion.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Oh, Kohler.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I'm in favor of it as well. And the way I look at it is it's almost like a capital refund, just a lot faster. It might not put cash in their pocket, but in reality it does, because it'll reduce what could be a rate increase for them. And I do believe we're going to see some rate increases from Tri-State sooner than later. So I'm in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anything else, John, so I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, all in favor of the motion, hold your hand up and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstained? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you, guys.
Great. Anything else, Sue?
No, that's all I had. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Sue. Okay, to the Committee on Policies.
I'll go. Thanks, John.
Ted, on it. Have at it.
If you're driving through the
Ted, your headset or your voice is pretty tinny. If you can maybe adjust your mic.
testing. No. Give me one extent here.
Testing. That should be better.
100%.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm on page 57 of 85, just a short textual report from Committee on Policies. Committee on Policies met on December 7th. Primary topics of discussion were finalization of the recommended changes for this policy 103, delegation of authority, regarding which you'll see a memo down below that we'll discuss in a moment. The other primary topic was moving along next steps in our discussion and expected modifications for LPEA line extension policy. You'll also see a memo that we'll discuss below for that. Let's see. So we'll get into those memos, and I guess in preface to that, we will be trying to take actual action on the recommended changes to policy 103, but our action on line extension policy will be limited today to allowing staff to go ahead and post the proposed changes to the line extension policy to start off the public comment period. So again, a little bit more detail on that when we look at the memos. And then just as it relates to the December meeting, we discussed that upcoming topics coming from staff would be some focus on our net metering policies. So that's the report. I'll take any generic questions, and then we'll move into the two memos. No hands going up. So we'll move down to past the finance memo. We're now on page 60, if you're following along there. Let's see. So the memo describes and presumably everyone's seen this. This got posted for comment a couple of weeks ago. We got a little bit of comment feedback on it, but not a lot. Some of the comments were, very simplistic. I approve, keep going. And as we're looking at this memo, I need to put in a fairly big apology. There's going to be, I'm going to have to post on screen a relatively significant change to the recommended board action section A.
Ted, do you want me to post that now while you're?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do that. And while you're doing that, I'll let Tim chime in with a question or comment.
I was going to make a motion, but it sounds like I should wait.
Yeah, give us 1 second, please. So there was Kohler caught a few things, and I want to talk through those. There was just a typo right there where Graham is circling. That previously said H, which just referenced the wrong paragraph. So we've updated that to B, and then the rest of it is clarification. So originally the language talked about this the non-budgeted sort of expenditures as the 0.25% of this number, budgeted annual income, but budgeted annual operating revenue and patronage capital. Kohler asked another good question on that, and I'm going to let Carl address it in a moment. But we agreed, and it's been reviewed now, and so we're recommending that this 0.25% be the way that non-budgeted allowance is calculated. In the previous language that was unfortunately in the board packet, we kind of referenced also a dollar value of $250,000. And so we've eliminated reference to that, and we've only referenced the yearly calculated number of 0.25%. So that accounts for the change you see in sort of the first paragraph. The second paragraph really references a different thing, which was present in the previous language. It was just mixed up in terms of the sentence structure. And basically, the second paragraph deals with the fact that the CEO is allowed to make expenditures exceeding this value if they're for vital and unanticipated emergency repairs. That is actually no change from the previous policy language. That ability of the CEO, that delegation of authority, has always been there. And then Section B is no change. So the important thing, I guess, to note here is that what you're seeing on the screen, A and B, are the actions that we're hoping for a motion on. We made these changes. I discussed them with Carl and Graham, and then I got approval of all of the Committee on Policy to present this differently than what shows up in the board packet. So once again, apologies. Hopefully this is more clear rather than less clear. And I do want to, before we take a motion, answer a question that Kohler asked about what is this actual number, budgeted annual operating revenue and patronage capital per fiscal year. I think it sounds more complicated than it is. And I asked Carl about it, and it is literally one number in our financials, in our budget. And I'll let Carl go ahead and explain that, if you would, please.
Thanks, Ted. Are you sharing this right now, Graham? Do you mind just taking it down very quickly?
Yep.
So that's kind of the language is unnecessarily verbose, shall we say, which is unusual for co-ops. But what all that really means, and I can demonstrate that real quick, is now I'm on the wrong screen there. Is if you actually look at Form 7, which we file every year with CFC, they refer to this line 1, operating revenue and patronage capital. It's just revenue. So for us, this is our 2021 Form 7. That's my scrawled signature there. For us, that 0.25% of operating revenue and patronage capital literally means our 0.25% of our budgeted revenue for 2023, which is around 109 million. And if I just switch between my tabs here, you can see this is the resolution that you guys passed in November. We're referring to this number here, the $109.7 million.
Okay, I appreciate that, Carl.
Thanks, Ted. Sorry about the clown show on the sharing.
Hopefully that addresses Kohler's question, and he can dig into it deeper if it didn't. But that's all I have. I'll turn it over to Tim's hand.
Yeah, so I'll just make the motion that we approve the proposed changes to policy 103, Section 2, item C, 4, B, and H as presented. That seems really verbose, but
Well, thank you, Tim, and Joe as the second. Further discussion, go ahead, Kirsten.
Yeah, in the lead up to this, we talked about that Holy Cross does a 20 basis points and we chose at 25 basis points. I know it's because the cost of a bucket truck. I'm not sure why we would have a 25% more leeway than Holy Cross did. What was can we tell me what the discussion is other than this lets us buy a bucket truck?
Yeah, I'll just give you the generic version of that, and if we need more, I'll let either Carl or Jessica chime in. But Holy Cross's starting number is much larger than this, so when they take their 0.2%, it comes out to a pretty large number. When we take our 0.25, it comes out to, simply speaking, a smaller number. And so it's somewhat based on that concept of, that 250 range is where we thought we needed to be right now, but it was better to use a percentage so that it would follow our increased revenue over the years rather than pick 250 now and 280 next year and 320 the next year. So that's I think the real answer to your question is our number is just much lower than theirs. And so the higher percentage makes sense.
Okay, thank you so much.
Great. Kohler.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I've got this clear as far as the and patronage capital. So Carl, for what you said, it sounds like it's just the title operating revenue and patronage capital. It's not actually a combination of two different figures. Would that be a correct understanding? Okay.
Yes.
That's what I needed.
Okay, great. Thanks for continuing to clarify that, Kohler. It's important that we know where the math comes from. Go ahead, Tim.
So just to be clear, it doesn't really add a lot of additional overhead to the number that we currently have. I mean, the difference based on that 109,700,000 is 275,000 versus 250. So we're not necessarily granting large increases in discretionary authority for contract approval as much as we are trying to find a way to keep up with authority at a level that's commensurate with that revenue number. Is that correct?
That's mostly true, Tim, except just for clarity, I want to point out that the 250 number, when it was in the memo, written as a dollar value, was already a considered modification to the existing policy 103, which indicates a spending limit of 100,000. So even with the 0.25%, we actually are bumping up that discretionary spending substantially. The logic, the reasoning behind that is it hasn't been done for quite some time, and it was believed to not be adequate. And that part of this was also reviewed in Finance and Audit Committee and sort of discussed that 100 was quite a low number and not up to speed for what type of discretionary spending we need today. Is that clear enough?
Kind of like mud, but I guess my question is, then follow on is, we've eliminated that 100K limit in this rewording.
We've changed that 100K limit to 0.25% of that. Yeah.
So that language is gone, replaced by this.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay. John, you want to handle the vote on this? We have a motion and a second.
Great. Okay, well, if there's no further discussion, all in favor, hold your hand up, say aye.
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 All opposed? All abstained? Okay, motion carries.
All right, we'll move into the next memo here, which is all about line extension policy. And again, it's important to clarify that this is an ongoing process, that this is not a request for board action specifically on the policy or on the language of the policy. What we're looking for and recommending right now is that we make public the current draft of the policy, which would reflect, there's a lot of language here in the memo, but it reflects all of the suggested modifications from staff for that policy so that we can start getting public review. public review will happen in parallel with board review, with the goal of accomplishing the 30-day public comment period, also accomplishing board review, and then getting approval of this in January. So also, it's, I guess, important to point out that we've scheduled a committee of the whole meeting to have a more detailed discussion of this line extension policy. So I guess definitely prepared to take questions and comments or straight into the motion, so we can keep those comments specific. But let's definitely try and keep it to what we're trying to accomplish today, which is putting this thing in front of the public. Tim, your hand was up first.
Yeah, thanks. So just to clarify, we post this for 30 days, at which time we incorporate comments. Then we repost for 30 days, or we approve with no opportunity for further discussion by public or board, based upon a vote that says we've incorporated what we learned and we approve, and it becomes the new policy. I'm just curious about the process.
Yeah, that's accurate what you said. It's probably worthwhile to let Graham comment on that based on sort of our requirements that sort of require us to do this 30-day notification. We have a policy that requires that. It's also probably driven by, help me out, Graham, but it's regulated. So will you kind of describe, I mean, Tim's totally right in terms of the process, but will you describe why we have to do it that way, or why that's the appropriate way?
So, yeah, so our policy 364 is how we post and amend tariffs like this. And as a matter of Colorado regulatory law, a line extension policy is considered a tariff. So our policy 364 Roman numeral 4B says or 4A is our notice provision. It says that we have to provide 30 days notice before the proposed effective date. And so if we have board authorizes us today, we'll start the posting tomorrow. One of the differences between when this policy started and today is that our local newspaper only publishes 2 or 3 days a week as opposed to daily. So we have to sort of work around the newspaper's publishing schedule to hit our dates. But then subsection Roman numeral 4B says the cooperative will hold a hearing to obtain and evaluate comments from members regarding the changes to the tariff. The changes ultimately authorized may or may not be the same as those provided in the original notice. So I think this kind of goes to your question, Tim, of if we make substantive changes based on either director's input or public input or both, do we have to go through a second posting period? And we do not, right? So this sort of allows us to streamline the process by having board comment period and public comment period at the same time, and then have sort of a consolidated hearing, if you will, which I believe is the intent of the January committee of the whole that we're looking at, or a similar type of event where we will compile and consider all the comments simultaneously and have one review period before the proposed effective date, which at this point would be the January 18th regular board meeting. The board would finally take final action of voting to approve any amended amendments at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a complete answer, but there's nothing that would prevent us if we got substantial comments that we wanted to ensure were addressed adequately. There's nothing to prevent us to give another notice period to allow further comment, right? So we anticipate January 18th, but we could also say it's February 18th or something and allow another 30 days. Is that correct?
Correct. We could continue the hearing and continue the comment periods and things.
So,
of that
so
nature.
hearing, is there a definition, Mr. Attorney, on what a hearing is?
It just says there isn't a specific definition of hearing. It is, sort of a matter of, I would say, holding a meeting. It says the hearing is designed to obtain and evaluate comments from members. So I would think the idea is that we would compile commentary from the public and consider it in a similar way to the way we compile and consider comments from the directors. It actually sort of more reflects our current Committee on Policies process, where we bring an initial draft to the non-committee directors, and we have another month of where we accept comments from the non-committee directors and evaluate them and incorporate them, and then have another Committee on Policies meeting where we come up with the final recommendation for vote.
Thank you. And so that hearing, we would take comment in that 30 days and evaluate it. But would there be an opportunity for members to comment at a committee of the whole hearing, which typically we do not allow? So a hearing at that time seems to me we should allow for last minute member input.
I would believe that would be something that would happen. I mean, it would not be dissimilar from our current meeting format where we have a public comment period at the beginning. I wouldn't recommend we deviate from that and sort of allow mid-meeting interjections from the public, but I think
it could follow our board format, but typically we haven't taken public comment at a committee of the whole. And I would just say, if that's a hearing, I would hope that we would do that. And so I think you've answered my questions. Appreciate the patience. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Kohler, you're the next hand up.
So I will move that we direct staff to post LPEA's proposed line extension policy for a 30-day public comment period in accordance with policy 364.
Second.
Okay, moved by Kohler and seconded by Joe. Further comments? Rachel, your hand's up.
Just to echo what Tim said, I like that we have some option to incorporate more public comment and really consider it with the time frame. So thanks for considering that. Also, I love how this is presented. It's so understandable. So thanks for whoever packaged up the rationale and kind of all the explanation.
Well, I'll just give the credit to Dan and Ryan. Lots of work has gone into this. I've seen it quite a few times now, both from Finance and Audit Committee, and then twice on Committee on Policies so far. And we really have worked through some modifications to how it's presented and trying to make it as clear as possible. Both what's the overall goal of this policy change and what is specifically changed to achieve that goal. And yeah, it's a long and complex policy, and Ryan spent a lot of time going through the current policy to find the concerns and problems and the things that we thought really did need to be changed. So, but when you tackle something that's that lengthy, with different sections and complexity, yeah, this is the only way to do it, in my opinion. And again, to reiterate your compliment, Rachel, it's been done extremely well. So thanks to staff for that effort. Bob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, since this is a big change and a really pretty significant look at how costs are, who shoulders the cost of these developments, do we have a sense already, or have you kind of reached out or run any of this by the development community? Do we know? Do people know this is coming? And do we expect a significant pushback?
That's a good question, Bob. So Ted, do you mind if I answer?
No, go ahead. Yeah, and or Dan.
Yeah, so I've met with a bunch of the developers. I meet with the Developers Association pretty frequently, and they really said it doesn't matter, Kohler or Bob. They didn't even know that some of them were getting that rebate. It's not that much money, and to them, it wouldn't make any difference. And then I have met with economic alliance groups, both in La Plata and Archuleta counties. And they both said that really, as they see it now, these incentives for developers are really focused more on high-end housing. That's what's being developed. So that's what we're giving the incentives for. So they encouraged us to stop this incentive. And they really like the idea of developing some other optionality or grant or something else for affordable housing. So far, no one has given us pushback, even the developers.
Well, I appreciate hearing how much you've pre-sold this, so to speak, and that it isn't coming as a surprise and all that. So nice job. And I also think it's really wise to put the costs where the benefits lie. So nice work, everyone.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for the good question. And I mean, I'll just say that Jessica's response is the tip of the iceberg. The amount of research and effort, both community-wide, inside LPEA and inside the financial structure in LPEA has been extensive. So I feel confident that we're doing our homework. I'm excited for the conversation about, is this the right plan? Where do we go with the full board? And I would just encourage everyone to think pretty hard about it before the committee on the whole. Don't come in blind. Make sure you understand everything as best you can, everything that's in this excellent memo. It's a good starting point, and we'll have a good discussion about it. I'm presuming that alignment will be really good. All the comments I've heard from board members have been all pointed in the right direction. So there'll be, as always, there will be some details to work out, but staff is excellent at that, and hopefully it makes it easy for the board to push it in the right direction. Kohler, what do you have?
Just a quick question on logistics. So will you put out a Word doc before our CAL meeting that we can make comments, or do we save our comments and things until the committee of the whole?
We will put out a doc because it'll be the same document that goes to the public. And I'm gonna stumble over that question a little bit. I don't think we've thoroughly considered whether we should start receiving comments sort of at that detailed level of the Word doc before or after the committee of the whole. I might defer slightly to Jessica on that one. I guess my vote would be that we have the committee of the whole first, because I believe that this is primarily a philosophical change that has to roll down through quite a few details. But I wouldn't want a lot of wasted time on details before we have sort of an alignment from a philosophical level. So that's my lean, but also it puts a lot of onus on the time we spend in the committee of the whole. And I think, as everyone can kind of see, we're rushing. We're trying to get this done as quickly as possible. We would love to have a revised policy before a lot of I guess construction stuff starts in the spring. We'd like to have something that we can have out there in the public and being supported by staff. Before we wouldn't prefer to do this mid-construction season and have people calling in and getting one answer and then calling in a month later and getting a different answer. So we do have some time pressure, which maybe back to Tim's point, if we get it done, great. If we can't get it done, we still do have the ability to stretch that time frame out. But long-winded answer to my thought process is we do committee on the whole before we start digging into the Word document.
Good. That's good to know. So that's what I needed to find out. Thank you.
Does that make sense, Jessica?
Yes, and we actually are preparing a pretty detailed memo with a lot more detail to send out to the board in advance.
Okay, thanks very much. Rachel, next.
Yeah, just noodling around on some things and hearing constraints on time frame. Also hearing and reading through this, very much understanding this is philosophical and in a certain way strategic decision we're making, right? Like this was, the past policy was done to drive development. We're saying, ooh, let's shift away from that. One thing, you know, when I first started reading this, it took a little while to sink in that this is really focused on commercial and development level projects and initiatives, and not necessarily single home builds, not necessarily. Or that's the, when I read through this, that's the driver. And I wonder, with all the kind of the exceedingly high and understandable awareness around home pricing here and the need for workforce housing, et cetera, if the public gets a hold of this, or just sound bites of this, if there might be a misinterpretation of our intent here. And I would be personally quite curious, since we are making some philosophical or strategic changes, to hear a little bit more of their thoughts and opinions live and in real time. I think it could help give information on how to message and market, but also help to inform us and how to move forward. It's cool to know that the developers have been kind of contacted and already provided insight and thoughts. But I don't know, I guess what's coming to my mind, and I know it's the holidays, I hear you're trying to rush this through, is if there's any value in having one of those evening webinars where working people can potentially attend and learn more. Those tend to be our most engaged people and the people that really want to learn and know, and that ultimately can be your champions, but also really inform the work. So just a thought.
Thanks, Rachel. I mean, worth considering for sure. Not totally related to that, but related to your interpretation or your reading through this. You know, remember, it's called line extension policy, and that's what it relates to. You know, it addresses. It doesn't address development. It doesn't address, you know, things outside that. If we have to stretch the lines, if we have to extend the line somewhere, this is where we have policy statements about how we deal with that. You know, it's not all subsidies in here. You know, there's some of it is just fee collection and whatnot. And so it's just a good way to envelope it, to scope it and say, you know, this is what this refers to. You know, my sort of, I guess if you would call it a rebuttal to that, is that, you know, this probably doesn't have significant impact on the membership. It's not something, I mean, everything has impact on a membership, right? Even a strategy change that we have. So I don't want to downplay the fact that it does. But it's not like when we talk about power supply, you know, it's not, in my opinion, it doesn't raise to that level. You know, this is almost, again, personal opinion here, but, you know, only by definition does this rise to the level of a tariff, in which case it requires public comment. And so, you know, I struggle a little bit with, I see the problem that you're pointing out, that once we ask for a public comment, we will get some. And if we don't present it properly or give the appropriate opportunity to discuss, then it can go a way that we don't want it to go, or that it probably doesn't need to go if properly presented or couched. I would suggest that we can probably address public comment almost on an individual basis, based on what's likely to come out of this, you know? And so to me, it doesn't rise to the level of a need for a, what do we call those? Like a town hall meeting or something like that. I think we need to put in the effort to make sure that the interested public does understand, you know, has the ability to understand and gets the answers that they're looking for, but probably not to the level of but, you know, I mean, maybe that comes out of the committee of the whole, that we actually do need that. You know, I think the hope here is that consensus happens easily, you know, that we're thinking about this as a big thing, but maybe it's not as complex as it is big. And that we coalesce very, very quickly and easily on what is the right answer here. And if that doesn't happen, then we do have to keep digging in, and we may have to back up a little bit and change our approach, and even include something like, more deep public participation. I mean, Tim brought it up almost at the beginning. What if we don't have agreement? Can we keep letting people review it and have comments? And absolutely, that's allowable. And maybe we decide that it's mandatory if we can't bring this thing to a point quickly.
Well, I guess just to restate it and clarify, I don't actually think it's a board level thing I'm speaking to. I'm just reading it with the eyes of like community lay people seeing a new tariff announced, like, what is this? And so it's more of just a PR and comms, and I'll obviously leave that to staff. They know that's their whole realm, and whether or not they choose to do that or how they do that, but just something to flag from first reading. Thank you.
I appreciate you clarifying that I don't need to take responsibility for that. Okay, thanks a lot. Joe, your hand's up.
Yeah, just a couple things. I think we need to realize as we go into the next discussion that this is a long-term liability for all of our members, and it will continue we'll continue to add to this for as long as, this old policy remains in effect. So I think we have to also look at the other side of this, is that, this $400,000 a year in terms of housing is really just a drop in the bucket. But it also is a burden that we have to spread out to all of our members. So I just want us to realize what business we're in, and that a direct subsidy doesn't always have to be a direct subsidy. So and one other thing I did bring up in our committee meeting, asking if the fees that the staff presented were high enough, because this hasn't been reviewed in a long time, and they assured me that these were adequate amounts that would last for a while. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Joe. And Kirsten.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to the committee of the whole discussion on this. I would like to say that I've never had a city market moment where a developer has come up to me and asked about why is it so bloody expensive to extend a line. But I have had individual members come up and say, oh my God, my son, give him this property, he's trying to build, but he can't because it's going to cost him X amount of money. And I've had 3 of those over the past 6. So this isn't just about developers, it's also about individual members, and it's the way of life, but it's not just about developers. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so kind of last call on questions, discussion, and we do have a motion and a second that's really verbatim out of the memo. So seeing no more hands, John, will you handle the vote on this?
All right, all in favor, hold your hand up, say aye.
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 All in favor? Opposed? All abstained? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Thanks, Ted, for navigating that.
No, yeah, and thanks for the participation, and looking forward to the continued process. And just one more kudos to staff for helping us drive through this. It is complicated, and they're doing a great job. So that's it for Committee on Policies.
Terrific. Okay, we are chugging along at a pretty good clip here. We can take a 10-minute break now if you want, or we can keep going. Our scheduled break was not until 10:45. So anybody have a strong opinion? I would prefer to keep going if we can. And just as a quick note, Matt will not be joining the call today. So he's out of the country doing whatever lawyers do. Okay, well, absent opinions otherwise, let's push on. So
we can give a FERC update, John.
Okay.
There is no
great.
update.
The update is there is no update.
Well,
Okay.
so I was in Washington, D.C. last week. I was at a meeting, and Rich Glick, he's the chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, was there. I cannot bring up the case because it's ex parte and it's a legal no-no because they could throw out the case. So I couldn't ask him about the timeline, but I did spend time just generally talking. And so he fully understands and knows that we're waiting on the case. Unfortunately, with Rich Glick, he may no longer be the chairman or at FERC. That's what happens in politics and elections, is that he has to be reconfirmed as the chairman of FERC. And the current discussion in Washington, D.C. is that he will not be, and he will lose his job. So we'll have to wait on that. That's unfortunate because he does know us well. He does know our case. I was hopeful that he would push the BDP, at least the partial case, through before he left. But if you can imagine, FERC has a lot of bigger issues they're dealing with, like pipeline security, cybersecurity, reliability standards. So I'm sure he's trying to finish and complete some of those tasks before. But, we continue to be working with Tri-State. The op-ed that I shared with you will be in fortnightly. I think it's Energy Fortnightly in January. So that's good news. We just continue to try to reach FERC in different avenues so that they read these documents and see, okay, we're still waiting on this. So that is pretty much the update on FERC, unfortunately, but we do have another big item that we wanted to brief you on, but it has to be an executive session because it is part of our three-pronged strategy. So are there any questions? Bob, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I don't follow those FERC politics really much at all, but what is it that tells you that Rich Glick's not going to get reconfirmed?
So it's a lot of it's in the news, but a lot of it is in Washington, D.C. It's Manchin has to approve him because he's the Energy Committee, and he is telling staff and the news outlets that he's not potentially going to, and that's because Rich Glick went pretty aggressive on some policies in the past 4 years that Manchin does not agree with. And so that's the change. It's all politics. It's how Rich ruled on certain issues compared to Manchin's politics now that he's in charge. So
okay, well, it makes sense. I mean, I did have it makes sense and doesn't make sense. That he seemed to be quite, I think he's a Republican, but he's quite friendly to the changes in energy policy related to climate. So I guess, is it all tied into, I know this is all speculation, but about Manchin defending coal? I mean, is that really what's going on?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Caller, did you have a question?
Just a quick comment. I really appreciate the op-ed that you and Dwayne Hiley did. I think it was very well done. It also really is helpful for me at Tri-State. So thank you.
Good. Thank you, caller. Tim?
Yeah, just quickly, when is Glick's term up? Is it is this a vote that has to occur this year? Senate Judiciary Committee or?
No, it's the Senate. It's the Energy Committees on both the House and the Senate. I'll have to look when his term is up. I thought it was up this summer, but they can remove him basically at any time. And again, that is one of the issues with FERC because it's so political. Any member of FERC can be removed at any time.
All right, thanks.
Okay. So I think if you want to move to either a break and then executive session.
No, let's knock the executive session out. And then we'll take a break. Okay, so we need a motion to go into executive session on the subject of the three-pronged strategy. Do I have that correct? Okay, Kier, do you have a question or a motion, Kirsten, or comment?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if we might want to go through the attorney report first, because sometimes when we go to the attorney report, they say, oh, no, we need to talk about that in executive session. So I'm wondering if we might want to do Graham before we go into executive session, if that would be okay.
Sure. Seems like a good suggestion. Okay. So yeah, so Graham, you you ready to jump ahead and do your report? So we're doing 9A, the attorney report, and then we'll come back up to executive session.
So I'll just refer everyone to my written report. If anybody has any questions on that, Kirsten.
Yeah, I you know, you'd guess that I would have a question because I was wanting an executive session. Two things. One about the DFNA, if we can have any more information about that. I know this has been an ongoing discussion with Tri-State, and there were some issues a couple of years ago about the who abandoned who on that one. Is this just kind of a regular allocation of costs, or is this anything different?
It's a little bit different, and it's, I think, relatively financially sensitive to fast track. So I'd like to discuss that in executive session. Thank you for handling it this way, Kirsten.
Super. Then my other question, and my apologies for not already looking this up in our Google Docs or in our Google Drive, the EMF member inquiry. Am I going to find that and your response and stuff in the area where we respond to members? And if not, can you talk about it in executive session?
Yes, I can talk about it in an executive session, and I think we were posting that in our member correspondence file. I'll look into that, and we will make sure that you have what our written response is, but I'd be happy to discuss that in executive session as well. Just because of the specificity, I don't want to sort of identify members specifically.
Okay. Great. So thank you for doing that, for calling that out that way, Kirsten. Let's go ahead and ask for a motion now on two matters. Yes, one for the three-pronged discussion on three-pronged strategy, and the second on a legal matter.
Or two legal matters. One legal matter related to our dark fiber network agreement with Tri-State, and one related to a member concern that contains confidential,
sensitive and confidential
matters.
Information. Terrific. Okay, let's get to that. Can I get a motion as stated?
Yeah, moved as stated.
Ted?
Second.
Thank you. Bob? Great. All in favor? Going to executive session. Hold hand up. Thank you. All opposed? Great. All abstained. Great. Let's go ahead. Actually, since this is so let's go ahead and knock this out. We will see you on the other side. Everybody take a moment to make sure that they have their executive session link. And
It's
we'll
in your
see.
calendars.
Terrific. Frantically looking for mine. Thank you. Okay, we'll see you on the other side. Okay, no actions came out of the executive session. So let's resume the agenda. So we had the attorney report, and I believe we are picking up with the director reports. So section Roman numeral 9B. Correct? Okay, so let's hear from Roundup.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you. Let me just bring up my report. Well, actually, are there any questions about the report that are in the package? Pretty straightforward. We got money, we gave money. Yes, sir, Tim.
I don't know, maybe you've explained this before and I've just forgotten. But in the reports, it says for example, the CEAC and the Pagosa Outreach Center, they have a weekly support goal of 500. And then it says monthly donation, which is above that number, and I'm not quite sure how to read that. Can you kind of explain what the weekly support goal versus the monthly donation, what that means? It's on page 79 of 104 in my report.
I can, as far as for the POC, the Pagosa Outreach, as far as how they do it in SEEK, I can't talk to you about that. So for POC, we have a weekly goal, and it says, okay, in general, you 3 directors, there's 3 of us in Archuleta who attend the POC on a rotating basis. In general, you could just spend X amount a week. If you want to go over that amount, you can, and we sometimes do. And then we also put any money that we don't use into our reserve. So if there are some big ticket items at a later point, then we can use that. So we use the reserve when needed, because sometimes we go a few weeks in a row with no applicants at all, and then other times we have lots of applicants and there's a lot of opportunity for us to move that money. So it kind of goes beyond the weekly. Does that help you, Tim?
Well, I don't know. I think you're answering on behalf of the POC rather than on the foundation, Roundup Foundation. I'm just curious what's the relationship? Maybe you should look at what I'm saying there. But those two, there's some sort of weekly support goal. I assume that is how much money LPEA Roundup is trying to provide to them. And then there's a number in a column next to it that says the monthly donation. So I'm just not sure of the interrelationship there. Are we trying to meet a goal of $500 a month, which is $2,000, I guess, in the CEAC, or $200 for the Pagosa Outreach Center, but we only gave them $834. I don't understand that relationship, I guess.
Okay. So you're on page 78. I'm sorry, I was looking at page 79 and answering it there.
Yeah, sorry, it's 79 in my packet. So
good, you're good. So the Rachel, help me. Actually, I can fumble, but I think Rachel, you might have this.
Rachel left you.
I was getting my hot drink out of the microwave.
Okay. So we've got, Rachel, do you want to take this, or do you want me to try to fumble it?
With the C part or the POC part?
You know, he's saying that I wasn't answering the question. I'm sorry. You were getting your drink. So we've got the weekly of the. I'm not seeing the weekly, but we've got the how much is available and then how much is the reserve. The goal is based upon, or the difference. You're kind of after the difference and where that's based upon, Tim.
Yeah, I don't know. It says Community Emergency Action Coalition, for example, weekly support goal, $500 / monthly donation, : on the right-hand side, it says $2,511. I'm not sure what that information is really telling me, right?
Yeah, so on the SEEK in particular, there's been some work to try to make that clear, honestly, to board members, because it's also been a little bit fuzzy, and we can send out the documents that explain it. It's not as clean as I would like in some ways, but basically at minimum, we're bringing $500 to the table every week. But it's like the weekly, there's a monthly slush fund, if you will, of an extra 500 that was allocated. And so basically, because different members show up every week, we all know we have at minimum 500 to spend. And then because there's typically more need than there is funding brought forward by all the collective organizations, there's this extra 500 that can be spent. And ideally, it's not just one person that spends it in 1 week, but it kind of, this is getting really confusing. Basically, Jessica Wheeler keeps track of how much of that 500's been spent, each of the extra 500's been spent each week, and she'll inform the next person of what's in the slush fund left for them for the following week. And by month's end, we've always drained the 2,500. It just supposedly gives us a little
So the
more
goal is
flexibility to meet the specific needs. of a specific client load each week. And they really are weird numbers because they're not like grants where you round up or round down. They're literally to the exact dollar. Someone needs $614 to make up for their back pay and rent so they don't get evicted. And so that month, man, if I can only give 500, I'm not helping these people out. They're still going to get evicted. So if I can dip into the slush fund for that extra 114, we're keeping them in their home.
All right, so the goal is 500 and the number in the column to the right, the 2511 under this report is the actual disbursement.
I believe that is correct.
All right. And sometimes it goes over because of circumstances associated with the request from that agency. Okay, all right. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I think I understand now. Appreciate it.
So
Can I just add just a quick point of clarity? I think maybe some of that confusion is the wording of weekly support goal. And to my memory, that's sort of the pace at which this gets funded out of Roundup. And so, you know, in quite round numbers, Roundup is putting in about $500 a month to support the SEEK, or $200 for POC. And so that's kind of the pace or the you know, if you're hitting that goal, you're dollar in, dollar out. Of course, there is a reserve, and that's what allows for this kind of what Rachel described as the slush fund. And it's really very quite close to when we talk about either Roundup or the educational funds out of unclaimed capital credits, where, you know, your general goal is dollar in, dollar out. But if you have a surplus, you know, they always try and figure out how to essentially spend down that surplus, so we're not keeping too much of it when it could be put to good use. So I'm thinking maybe it's just a little bit of a wording clarity on what does goal actually mean.
We'll dive in a little bit more and either send an email or bring it back next month to just a flag for you all. Oop, just a flag for y'all, and Kristen, if you already said this, sorry. But we are seeking new director nominations. And so we changed the process. Hillary sent out an email, or Jessica did, with that link where people can apply. So please encourage folks to submit their applications. We're trying to do this in a different way and be more open. So get the word out, and let's get some good folks to apply. Yes, Kohler.
Yeah, I was wondering, have you got any results yet of people? I know somebody talked to me, and I don't know if he signed up yet or not. I wanted to kind of follow up with him if he hasn't.
We have 28 applications.
Wow, cool. Oh, good.
You guys are going to have some decisions to make.
From all the districts, across all districts?
Yeah, 28 total.
But yeah, but not.
But there are, yeah, it's a nice mix of different districts. Yeah.
Okay. Tri-State.
All right, I did send out the Tri-State report. I emailed it to all of you this weekend. I'm sorry I couldn't get it in before the deadline. And I appreciate Janelle getting it in there later or earlier this week. I think if you look at the length of that board report, as well as if you look in the board docs, all the documents in the file for December, it reflects on the meetings that we had. And they've been long, they've been intense, and they're covering quite a few subjects. So what I thought I would do is just bring up 3 different presentations I want to just kind of hit on, and then I'll take questions. Because I think these 3 might be of interest to all of you, and you can look back in the docs and look it over and kind of learn some stuff with it. So the first one is the direct assignment, and the presentation that you would find in the board docs it's called the TS Direct Assignment Status Presentation December 2022. And this talks about the ALJ, or the Administrative Law Judge, reserved issue number 2, which is the direct assignments. And what they did is they wanted to deal with integrated facilities and kind of define that. And you'll find slides in there that talk about that, so that might help you out as far as understanding that a little bit. And the way it stands right now is that Tri-State puts all of their assets, they just roll all of it in and everybody pays a transmission fee. And what this ruling that came out, I guess you'd call it a ruling, but what it says is that Tri-State can no longer roll that into the A40. And there's consequences on that, you know, you have to find out, okay, are you going to get penalized for it, or are you going to subsidize somebody else? And it is my thought, and I haven't seen the results yet, but Dan mentioned it, I think LPEA is actually paying for other people's transmission. I don't know if that's correct or not, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Jessica. And so the consequences of this ruling is a positive for LPEA. It also has very negative impacts on some of the other co-ops. And they're big, they're small co-ops, and they are on a radio line, and they get hammered pretty hard with this. So what you'll also find in here is another thing that's referred to quite a bit, and that's the man-field factors. And there's a page there that lists them. There's 5 factors, and that's what FERC uses as a test. And basically, if you fail all 5 of those, then you become direct assigned. And so that'll give you an idea. If that comes up, you can take a look at that slide and figure out what they're talking about with that. And then the status right now is what Tri-State is doing is they're doing an analysis on every one of the co-ops individually, all their members. And as soon as, and they're going right up to the delivery point, they're looking at all these assets and facilities and analyzing that, okay, what are they? Are they tariffed or are they non-tariffed? They deal with the OAT. And again, some of these, and when I say the OAT, just to remind you, that's the open access transmission tariff. But you'll see that described in those as well. But then they were going, as soon as they finish that analysis for that co-op, then they'll send it to the co-op. And I don't know if we received ours or not. And then I think this week they were going to have a town hall and dig in deep so that the co-ops understand where they'll be. So just quickly, if you're interested in that, I'd look at that presentation. The next presentation, and what we do at Tri-State, at every standing committee does an educational session once a year for the whole board. And December, the educational thing was by External Affairs, which is the committee that I serve on. And the topic was going to be RTOs. When this came up and we voted for a subject, I was not in favor of that because I thought there was something better than what the RTO was. But this presentation overwhelmed me. I mean, it exceeded my expectations by quite a bit. It was a pretty stunning presentation that they did. So you can look in there, and let me stop right there real quick. Tim, did you have a question? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Kohler. I was trying to find the direct assignment presentation. And when I click on that link, it goes to something about capital credits. So I think the link in this board report is incorrect. So if you get a chance to find that, I would like to look at it.
Sure.
And I might have other comments later, but I don't want to stop your flow either. So.
Okay, and you can also go to our board docs under board documents, I think, and then under Tri-State, and then under board documents, and then it's 2022-12, that file, the last file or the first file, and you'll see all these, and there's probably, I don't know, 20 some presentations in there. So you can go directly to that if that helps you, and I'll have to check on the link.
All right,
so,
thank you.
Anyway, back with the RTO, like I said, this really was an impressive presentation, not just to me, but also the whole board as well as staff. I think everybody learned a lot on that. And what they did is they brought in a gentleman, his name was Mike Ross. He's a senior vice president of external affairs and also stakeholders relations with SPP. So his presentation was biased somewhat towards SPP, but so is the Tri-State board and Tri-State staff as far as looking at different RTOs and what we're going to do going forward. I thought one of the fascinating things that he mentioned for helping to understand an RTO is he said, we look at ourselves just like an air traffic controller. He said the air traffic controllers, they don't own the planes, they don't own the runways, they don't own the taxiways. They have to coordinate with other facilities across the country or close. And something that happens in Florida can affect something that happens in California. And it was a really good explanation. So SPP is really a nonprofit. It doesn't get profits off this. It doesn't own these facilities, it controls them. And you'll get some of that information out of that presentation. It'll talk about what they do, what kind of market they operate in. It'll talk about the market facts about SPP. It talks about the spot prices. There's a slide there that shows all the spot prices of 2021 for all the RTOs in the country, and SPP was the lowest at $30.40. It'll also mention a little bit about the WEIS. Some people call it the WEIS, and that's the Western Energy Imbalance Service. This is a service that is provided by SPP. Tri-State is a member of that. Colorado Springs joined it fairly recently. And then Piesco or Excel, Black Hills, and Platte River will join in April. And then when it comes around to the April timeline, then there's a decision to be made that the people are interested. Do we want to go with the SPP RTO? And we're hoping that Excel comes in. Right now, Excel is kind of the resistance about doing SPP. It's not completely clear. They were kind of leaning towards Cal ISO. But they actually operate an SPP on the Eastern Interconnect. But here they're kind of resisting, but I think they're going to drop that resistance due to that they're going to go into the WEIS, or WEIS, and also economically it's making a lot more sense in California. And one of the big key things about the RTOs is the governance. With the Cal ISO, that is governed by a board that is appointed by the governor of California. And that is the governing body. So you don't get a seat at the table if you aren't in the state of California and you aren't good with the governor. With the SPP, that's what they're working on now, is getting what the governance will be for the Western Interconnect. So anyway, if you get a chance, I'd look at it. There's another slide on there that tells you some of the benefits. They show the maximum and minimum percent of generation mix, and they're comparing wind, coal, gas, nuclear, and hydro in their present footprint. They don't have solar, and the reason why is solar is less than 2% of the 11 states that they control at this point in time. So that's an interesting slide to look at. And then it also has a slide on the CO2 reduction. And one of the points that they make is 284 million tons were displaced by wind since 2014. So if you have interest and get a chance, take a look at that presentation, and as I mentioned, where you can find it. And then the third thing I want to talk about, and this is the toughest one, takes up most time and is really concerning to all of us, and that is the financial position of Tri-State right now. October came in very ugly, not close to even what the budget was. We expect that November and December will probably be about the same. So 2022 is a very rough, ugly year. But as Dwayne Hiley told us, he said, you better put on your seatbelt because 2023 is not going to be for the lighthearted. It's going to be ugly for some time. And at the end of when I talk about this, after I answer questions, I'll talk a little bit about the possibility of rates and what the rate discussion is. But what Tri-State did to try to help out the board and figure out where we are on this is they did another presentation, and you can find this, and it's called the TS Cost Increase and Rate Pressure. And Kirsten in her report also had a link to that as well. And it'll talk a little bit about, October and how ugly that was. But then it starts talking and looking at prices, because what Tri-State wanted to do is find out, okay, can we control this? Is it just us? Is it the whole region? Where do we fall in on this and the picture that we have? And so to give you an example, the SPP power prices on their increases. So the day ahead from 2021 to 2022, in the summer, it went from $33.30 a megawatt hour to $74.63 a megawatt hour. And overall, for the 9 months, it was 124% increase. And for real-time prices, again, 2021 to 2022, in the summer, it went from $30.68 a megawatt hour to $69.65 a megawatt hour. That had an overall increase of 127%. And then gas also hit, and that's natural gas, hit an all-time high for the integrated marketplace at $8.03 for an MMBTU. So those are some of the pressures that are not just us, that's also SPP and is hitting Tri-State. So Tri-State also looked at see what are other facilities doing as far as their rate increases. And Platte River, for instance, they had a 5% likely raise in 2023, but this is part of a 40% increase over 10 years. That's a huge increase, and especially when, like what we were talking earlier, and one of our goals is to get a flat rate going forward. Core, which used to be Intermountain Rural Electric, they instigated a 6% increase. Salt River Project, which is referred to a lot as SRP, they had a 4.7% increase, and then they're expecting another increase in November of 2023. And as of July, the end of July, they had undercollected $306 million. So another thing that Tri-State did is they talked to CoBank, that they have a lot of their lending with, and CoBank deals with 90% of all the G&Ts in the country. And what CoBank told Tri-State is there is only one G&T in the whole country that is not facing rate increases due to fuel prices and general inflation, and that's Basin. Basin Electric, you know, their Dakota Gas turned around. The higher price of natural gas is a benefit for them, where it pretty much hurts everybody else. So anyway, that's another presentation. If you get a chance, I would look at it and look it over, because I think you'll learn a lot, and this is stuff is what we're going to be facing quite a bit. And with that, before I talk about rates, I'd like to open it up for questions, because when I talk about rates, and I'm going to kind of flow right into Kirsten, and I'll have her pretty much take it over. So do you have any questions on either these presentations or the board report? I'm open for them at this point. Sue, it looks like you got your hand up.
I do. Just a quick question on the RTO that is made the presentation. Where are they located?
They're located in our dock. So if you go to, I don't know, maybe Drew, do you have that thread how to get right to it? I don't have it in front of me right now, and I don't want to give you the wrong impression, but I think it's.
Yeah, so if you point a web browser at drive.google.com and sign in with your LPEA address, that should get you there.
Okay, I actually meant,
then,
where are they physically located in the US? You mentioned they were a nonprofit. Where is their corporate headquarters?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were looking for the presentation.
I know. It was just kind of a similar question.
Yeah, their headquarters, they mention it. I can't remember now. It's in the southern part of their footprint. I don't think it's Oklahoma, but I don't know. Jessica, do you know where their headquarters is?
No,
I can't remember. I can find out. And one of the questions during this presentation is, well, if we join the SPP on the west side, do we get our own headquarters? And the answer was no, that headquarters would still remain where it is. And one of the advantages of looking at SPP is because they've got this system that has been proven, and they've got everything kind of put together. If you start, doing new headquarters or establishing a new RTO, the expenses, all this stuff just, skyrockets quite a bit. But I'll find out where that location is. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Little Rock,
They are
Arkansas.
in Arkansas.
Little Rock, Arkansas. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Dan. Tim?
Thank you, Kohler.
Yeah.
So the question I guess I have around a direct assignment, it sounds like Tri-State is trying to, it sounds like Tri-State is trying to kind of reverse that ruling. Am I understanding that correctly? Are they protesting or trying to change it back to where it's not direct assigned?
Yes, I think that that's their position when it's in front of the FERC commissioners, is they would like to have it to where a co-op, G&T co-op, as compared to an IOU, should not fall under these same things for a direct assign. And Tri-State's position on that is that they aren't too sure right now how to handle it, because this direct assign for LPA is good, but like Garland Power, I mean, it's pretty stunning the effect it would have on them. So I think Tri-State's going to figure out, okay, how are we going to handle this if it does go through? But for right now, let's see if we can get it so it doesn't.
And I'm certainly sympathetic to smaller co-ops that might have a cost impact, but I mean, effectively, we've been lectured by Tri-State executives, Dwayne in particular, since he arrived, about we can't unfairly burden other co-op members with costs, like, for example, in the CTP discussion, right? In particular, right? So this idea of fairness, and you pay your way and you're not burdening other members. This is a burden that a co-op like LPA, we're paying more than we need to, that's ending up to be a subsidy of sorts to Garland or other co-ops like that. And I'm kind of against using our member money to basically subsidize them fighting so that we can continue to subsidize them, right? And I just hope that you will reflect that in your conversations at that board level, which I imagine is probably unpopular. But, you know, on the one hand, we have to be fair, according to Dwayne. And on the other hand, well, maybe not over here because some smaller members will be hurt. I mean, they can work out a payment plan or something to Tri-State maybe over time. But why should we continue to be burdened with the cost that doesn't directly benefit our members when FERC has recognized that? So my personal opinion is to provide the feedback. Don't use our member money for attorneys at FERC to continue a subsidy that we have been unfairly paying for a long time. So
that point has been made, and I hear you very clearly as well. I think we'll know more after they get done with this analysis and they actually see what facilities, you know, fall into the OAT and what facilities fall into direct assignment. Excuse me, I pretty much same thing. So I'll know more. And one of the things that we're going to do is do a monthly update on this at the board level, so I can fill you in some more on next month, more that I hear. And I don't know if Jessica, were you able to go to the town meeting this? I think it was this week, wasn't it? We're going to discuss that.
12th.
Yeah, no, Dan and I actually had an interview with SEPA, but Carl attended in my behalf. So Carl, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I thought you summarized it well, Carla. They discussed a lot of that direct assignment stuff, went through some specific examples. What's going to be interesting, Dan and I talked about this, is they're going to send a diagram of what it looks like for each cooperative. And I know they've done about half of them. I assume they haven't done us yet because we haven't seen ours yet. And that's when we'll really know more of what that looks like. So that's really all I can add to that.
But on that point, this is something, Sue, that we're going to ask if we can bring to the FAC in January. So I would suggest if anybody's interested in seeing that analysis, hopefully we'll have it by then. But that was kind of our intent, is to bring what the direct assignment, what it would look like, how it would impact our rates.
Right.
Thank you. Appreciate that heads up.
And I believe you should see it this month. That's the goal that they're trying to get those completed. Right, Rachel?
Yeah, with some of these rulings as they come out and just listening to some of these conversations, I guess, how does, like for the oat, for instance, is that universal? Is there a way they treat oats different? If you're a cooperative, which has a very different philosophy and value system than if you're a for-profit IOU, or is oat and the way it's enforced across the board the same?
I believe that across the board it is the same.
Yeah, they don't treat, Rachel, just a reminder, this is the first time they've really regulated cooperatives for
Yeah.
cows, so they don't treat anybody different.
Yeah, because it seems like in some ways it's an unwinding of how REAs came to be. It's sort of, maybe, I'm not quite sure. It's just curious. All right, thank you.
You know, Rachel, there's a discussion going on about that right now, because part of the unbundling, which is different from the direct assignment, but part of the unbundling is so that your oat portion of your transmission is going to be very obvious. And where we're going with oat transmission billing is it's going to be MCP, so it's going to be different than how we bill our oat customers who are non-members, which we do as a 12 CP, which is basically your peak for the year. That's going to drive your price, so or your cost. So it is, yes, it's the same oat, it's the same rate, but how we're determining your peak period is different, and so it will have a different effect. And that's going to be very possibly a battle that might have to happen at FERC, saying, no, we're different. We should be different because we have a different structure, which is not why I have my hand up. So,
go ahead.
So,
please.
It's so much an ask a question. I'm sorry, I have a puppy that is going nutso in my office here, so excuse my, if you hear ripping in the background. The thing about direct assignment is it's more like retail co-ops than anything else. So in a distribution co-op, we don't charge somebody who is 100 miles away from the substation any different than we charge somebody who's right next to the substation. And we certainly charge electricity different by how much you consume, but for transmission, we've made a decision of we don't really charge that by the mile. And if we charged it by the mile, it might look differently. So direct assignment does have a place in a are we a cooperative or not discussion. And at Tri-State, that discussion is going on now. Now, I was directed by this board for the rate committee to say, no, we want direct assignment because we don't want any cross subsidization. So that's the argument I've been making. And it may be one that we lose at FERC if FERC can be convinced that no, really, this is where the cooperative really hits the road, is in things like this where we don't try to break out every single little cost. That's my comment on the direct assignment. I do have a lot of comments about the rate structure here.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. So now we will talk about rate. And John, just a reminder, we did move up the rate design committee report right after this. And I'm just going to start off now. I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten. Kirsten's report really hits.
Hang on, Kohler. Kohler, you got one more question here.
Before you get off, Bob. Thank you, John. Before you get off, Kohler, let me just ask you kind of a hypothetical, but there's a lot of things that have happened since Tri-State was successful at getting itself under the FERC umbrella, and the motive seems pretty clear what it was, and that's kind of worked, slow things down and make it harder. Do you think any of the board members or at Tri-State actually ever regret that? I mean, it's incredibly costly, it's bureaucratic, and now they're getting rulings. Like, lo and behold, they're getting rulings they don't like because they get treated. They were a co-op. The FERC never regulated, and they decided they wanted to be that, all because they added a greenhouse. We all know that's how they did it. Does anyone ever regret that new layer of bureaucracy and rulings that come down that they might not like?
Absolutely, there's some regrets. I think there are some things, and one of the big costs that we have that's hurting our financials is the legal cost.
Absolutely.
It's very, very high. And so they do have regrets, but I think what outweighs that when you talk to most everybody is that under FERC, you have one umpire. Before you were in FERC, you had 4 umpires, each state. And it was becoming impossible to try to, come out and get something that's workable for the co-ops that are in Colorado, which has a whole different point of view than the ones from Wyoming. In Wyoming, I think it was 2 years ago, they had a vote in their legislature that all generation had to be coal. And that was getting voted on, and it lost, but it only lost by 1 vote. Now, that wouldn't even come up in Colorado. So you can see the two different, different atmospheres there. So I do think there's regrets, absolutely. And I think there's real frustration with the timetable that it takes to get stuff done.
Yeah.
It's also a learning curve because some of the stuff that Tri-State is doing now, they've never had to do before. The board has never had to do it. And that's frustrating, as well as the board lost a lot of power. The board was its own regulatory or rate, group before that. So I would say, yeah, there is some, but overall, I'd say that they feel it's better to be under FERC than not.
Thanks for your reply. Thanks, Kohler.
You bet. So on the rate increase, what legal did at Tri-State is they looked back at the settlement and they saw that the rate moratorium, which keeps the rates where they are right now, only goes till May 31st. I, as well as many on the board, felt that went till September. The September date is when the comeback rate has to be presented. And so there is talk, should we put a rate increase in sooner than what we were doing before? Now, as I reported last month, Dwayne was pushing hard that we don't have a rate increase in 2023. But to be very honest with you, I don't think that's a possibility. We will wipe out our deferred income. It's about 49 million that'll be left for 2023. We're going to go through that fairly quick. I don't see any other route besides a rate increase to keep Tri-State financially secure. So that's the discussion we're having now as far as, okay, how's about a date? And the board's not discussing what kind of a rate or how it would be built. That's what the committee does. And with that being said, what I'd like to do, I can see I got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kirsten to kind of carry this ball a little bit further. So, Bob, your hand is still up. You got a question again?
Sorry, Kohler. No, thank you.
Okay, Tim?
So yeah, Kohler, I haven't had time to go through all the financials of Tri-State recently. So, and you indicated that October was ugly. And so I'm just curious, is this a cost out of control, lack of revenue? Which one is driving this ugliness more than the other?
The two biggest things that are driving it is fuel and cost of purchase power. Those are the two things that are just really hitting it hard. We actually had an increase on member sales. We had an increase on non-member sales. But if you look at, and mainly the price of natural gas, so we sold more power, but it cost us a lot more. And then some of our facilities were a little bit weak. So if you look at October, one of the weakest generation was wind. Wind was not strong in October. And so that had to be replaced. And what it got replaced with was gas. And gas is very expensive. And so those are the two elements that are hitting really hard.
But the report that you provided, and again, I didn't dig into the financials here, indicated that that's like 4% of the power generation was through gas. Is this, you're talking about outside purchases, which they they never delineate as to the source of the fuel, or they just say non-renewable. So you're saying that's like I forget, 20-some percent. You're saying that that's mostly gas generation and it is very expensive power? Is that?
No, not necessarily. The internal generation, and I see Carl has his hand up, so hopefully he's gonna throw me a life jacket. The actual tri-states generation itself, I mean, they've had some issues with some of their coal plants. Their wind, that is their wind that was way down, and they have to have that power. So they did, burn more gas.
Well, it says
sometimes they
only
burn less
4%
gas, but the price is higher.
Well, the
sorry?
gas and oil fleet generation were above budget, it says, and accounted for 4% of total power supply. Whereas coal fleet was 90% availability and 58% of total power. I'm just saying 4% doesn't sound like it would, I don't know, maybe the fuel margin is really that low, but it seems like that's hard to account for driving that much higher cost when it's 4%. So it just, I read this report and thought, oh, October looks pretty good. And that's not what you are indicating. So I'm trying to read.
Well, and what I can do, I think it's in the generation presentation. It actually has a chart there that shows gas, coal, and it shows the price and the amount that's getting used. And that's helpful too, because sometimes what happens is you aren't using more gas, but the price has gone way, way up. So the cost is huge. And I'll try to find that, and I'll let you know where that page is. Let me ask Carl.
Trying to make you do more work. I thought maybe you had I was missing something, but I think it's I got to dig into the numbers more if I want the answer. So I appreciate that. Thanks.
I'll just jump in
Carl,
real quick, Cola. Yeah, I always get to the Finance and Audit Committee unless there's something urgent LPEA business stops me. Yeah, the cost of fuel has been a huge problem all year. Gas, especially, as Cola's mentioning, but as Tim rightfully points out, there's a pretty small percentage of the overall fuel mix, but coal has been very expensive. Not the delta isn't as big, but because it's so much more of their fuel mix, it's very expensive. And just energy, they are using renewables, and that cost has been a lot more than people had figured it would be this year. So one of their big problems is just power purchases. It's been huge. Another thing that they've got around 50 million, I think 50 million in just write-offs that they'd had to put through their books of assets, coal plants mainly, I believe, Cola, where that's just a one-off, you got to get rid of it. And they had not budgeted that. That's been a huge problem. That wasn't a cash outflow, but it makes your income statement look pretty ugly. And then part of the cost cutting where they laid off some pretty senior staff, there was some big outlays to make that happen. There'll be savings down the road, but the initial outlay was pretty significant. So I think they're taking some good steps, and some of them unfortunately make 2022 look real bad. The unfortunate thing is, and Cola, you heard the same thing I did, people want to know about what's the legal fees when we're talking about G&A, and because of the nature of them, that's really we're not really sure. So we don't know. It's obviously a lot of money, and we don't really know. So that's unfortunate.
That's hard to find out. And I would like to also thank Carl for coming to those meetings. It really helps me out knowing you're there, because you'll understand things better than I do as far as that goes. I think another thing that's important, and this is also in that presentation I told you about the cost increase and rate pressure, is it shows some of these operating expenses for different G&Ts. So like Oglethorpe, from 2020 2021 to 2022 went up 43%. And let's see, let me get one that's a little closer. Excel, theirs went up 12.6. Tri-State went up 13.1. PNM, which is south of us, went up 24%. So it's not unique to Tri-State. Tri-State does have a few unique things, like Carl just mentioned. Another one that he didn't mention is what's called the ARO. That's an asset retirement obligation. We got hit with one of those in 2022 that was in the tens of millions. Also, we got hit, and I can't give you the specific amount because this was in executive session and I'm not too sure I can say it, but we got hit by the railroads, and the railroads hit us with a tens of $million hit at the beginning of 2022 if we wanted their service. Well, we have to have their service for coal. And we had to pay that, and then their service has really gone downhill. We've really struggled to keep our supplies, you know, up to where it's supposed to be. They keep saying they'll improve, and yet they don't. So there's not one specific thing, but boy, it's tough. It's really, really hard, pretty frustrating. So getting back to the rate, I don't see any other questions. The board is talking about that. How soon can we do that? We're getting desperate. I don't know that there's a choice. And what I'd like to do now is just turn it over to Kirsten. And like I said, if you look at her report, it's got some really good facts in there and some stuff that I haven't covered, but maybe she will. So Rachel, do you have something real quick for her?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. When did you say the rate term ends? It's not September, it was March or
It's
something?
May 31st.
Okay,
So
thank you.
they can actually put a rate increase in on June 1st. And I think Kirsten will probably address that when she talks about it. So Kirsten, I'll hand it over to you.
Let me address that right now, actually. So if they put one in the end of May, which is effectively June 1, the earliest it could be in effect would be August 1 because of the 60 days. So if there was a rate increase, the earliest it would be for us would be August 1. Because it's under suspension for 60 days. In addition, though, there's also this 5-month period that we just learned about this last month, that FERC, in addition to their 60 days suspension, can also do an additional 5-month suspension. And depending upon who you talk to, it's either totally uncommon, which is what Tri-State says, very common, which is what Poudre Valley's FERC expert says, or not uncommon, which is what Tri-State's consultant says. So it's very possible that the earliest anything can happen, even if we were to get a new rate on by June 1, would still be January 1. So the earliest it could happen, Rachel, is August 1. The more likely is going to be getting closer to January 1 of 2024 for that rate. So did that answer your question, Rachel?
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, super. So it's actually going to depend upon which version of director point you have, because my report was in there and then it wasn't, and I don't know if it's in there now. I had 2 reports in because I don't know if you recall that my November meeting was like the day before the last LPEA board meeting. So the November report is kind of boring, and if you have any questions about that, let me know. I do want to talk about the December report, and thank you, Kohler, for all your details on it. And I think you guys actually got some better presentations about that direct assignment than we ever got, because I think there's still some folks on the rate committee who are still confused about what that direct assignment and how that works. So I really appreciate that you shared that. That was very helpful. So we spent actually the morning of this whole thing talking about the rate increase. And I want to remind you that what we're working on is a rate structure, not the amount of the rate. But because there's going to be revenue increases, and there's also going to be a bigger amount than I think maybe people were anticipating. One of the things I want to highlight out of Kohler's discussion is the budget, and if we were to do it just how we are, the Tri-State Committee had to say, the Tri-State Board had to say, it's okay for us to break our own rules, and we're going to go down to a lower debt service ratio. At the DSR, we're going to go down to a lower debt service ratio than we are comfortable with. They're supposed to be heading to a 1.2, but they instead went down to a 1.1025, I believe. So, a 1.125. What that means is we're getting close. The Tri-State is getting closer and closer to their breaking their covenant, and their concern about 2023 is if things go the way they go, there's very little leeway. If we were to have to do any rate change at all until 2024, it's a very inelastic amount that has to happen. All that has to happen in order to get to our covenant floor, which is a 1.1, is there needs to be a $3.6 million decline in net margins. That's not very much money for a company the size of Tri-State. In order for us to get down to a DSR of 1.025, which is when the indenture trustee takes over operations, which is basically a bankruptcy, is only a $25.2 million change in net margins. So, this is not our first G&T, folks, that we belong to. We belonged to one before we belonged to Tri-State, and that one went out of business. And the reason they went out of business is because they refused to raise rates. It's like, oh, no, we don't want to raise rates because it's going to make it more expensive for my co-op. So they did not raise rates, and guess what? They went under. So Tri-State is looking at this. Could they maybe have seen this coming a little bit earlier? Maybe. I think we all were kind of holding our fingers about this whole inflation thing and all sorts of the things, the perfect storm that has come together. But the fact is, they're going to need to raise those rates in 2024 and probably bring them back as much as possible into 23, perhaps an August date, perhaps something closer to January 2024. In order for them, when they look at their revenue requirements for 2024, they're looking at a 6.4% increase to have a comfortable DSR of 1.2. To have the minimum, it would be a 3.8% increase, and that gets to where Dwayne was saying, oh, I hope we don't have to increase it more than what we decrease it. I think that is beginning to look like a Pollyannish view, and that's just not going to happen. There's going to be an increase. So then we talk about, well, how do we get there? So before I talk about how we get there, any questions about what I just talked about, that there's going to be a rate increase? And I do have a little bit about just kind of basically re-summarizing the stuff that we got from Tri-State. That's the first page of my December 8th report. Questions on that before I start talking about the structure? Okay, so that was the bad news. The good news is, the somewhat good news is that the new structure that we're talking about is a little more favorable to LPEA than it was, than it would have been if we didn't change the structure at all. Because we're putting more of our costs into demand, and because LPEA has a high load factor, putting the more costs into demand favor us, as opposed to having more of our costs in energy. So don't know which page it's on because I've got 3 versions of this up. On the page that starts with staff recommends, so staff recommends using what's called a peak energy, peaker equivalent instead of the AED. AED is a average energy demand fee. So it's going to go up from $9, which is what it has been. It's going to go up to $12.02 per kilowatt. If we were going the FERC predominant method, it would go up to $15 per kilowatt. And that certainly is what we've been pushing for, because we're saying, hey, that's really what the cost is. Let's be real. That's really where the cost is. Let's put it at $15 and get the energy cost way down. That, folks, is a dead end with the rate committee. It would be a dead end with the board. So what we're doing is saying, okay, well, we'll take what we can get. Let's go to the peaker equivalent. and let's revisit this, because there's a lot of things we want to revisit. Right now, we're saying, all right, this gets us a little bit there, but we want to revisit seasonal. I did that battle in November and lost that one terribly. Let's revisit the windows. Let's revisit all of the demand stuff. Let's revisit the FERC predominant method. And by going with a formula rate, Dan was concerned that, well, with a formula rate, that means they're never going to have a reason to revisit this. But there was a commitment made, at least it was made to the rate committee, that if you guys agree to a formula rate, we will come back in 3 years to revisit this whole rate structure. So that's a commitment that we need to hold Tri-State to. Okay? Do you guys have any of this in your package? Are you follow? Okay, good. Again, depending upon which version you have. So the staff is recommending that we change the demand the demand rate, and that it's going to be much more fair to us. Also talking about changing the demand billing window, making the East more aligned with their when their costs are, because Basin does have a different demand window than Tri-State does, and most of the East gets all their electricity from Basin anyway, so we want to make sure we align with that. Now, Dan did a wonderful job. I'd sent him the rate structure the way it did, and because I know you guys really respect Dan, as do I wanted to make sure we had his view on this. So there's a page here that says Dan Harms has this to say about the new rate design. So he's all about the formulaic rates, and the board is the committee is on that, and I hope the board will be on that with that. And that's something that staff is really hot on too. So I think it's probably going to go. So the higher generation charges is good as for what I just spoke of. The new demanding window, Dan sees as a good idea. The true procedure is a little complex, and when you look at it, I'm just going to have to leave it to Dan and Carl and those guys to tell me of, okay, this looks good or does not. But this is basically if the formula either under collects or over collects, then we make up for it in the next year, and there's various methods of how to do that, and that's how that whole true-up form goes. What I need to know is part of the true-up is kind of tied up with the rate stabilization. And now I know for our co-op, we just voted of let's put some money in rate stabilization because we think that's a good idea. What I need to know from you guys is, do you think rate stabilization, which again will make our current rates higher because we're saying, okay, we want to save some money for the rainy day, do we think that's a good idea at the tri-state level? And I'd like to, does anybody think it's not a good idea to make sure that there's some rate stabilization built into the formula? Who's ready for a fight on this one, guys? Anything? Ready? No? Okay, Tim, hi. Tim, mute.
Sorry, I thought you guys wanted me on mute, but so just to be clear, right? The question you're asking is essentially sounds like it's an internal tri-state issue, but which is do we support them having a rate that builds a rate stabilization fund? Is that essentially what you're asking?
Essentially, yes, sir.
So, and that means we're paying more in our rate, but perhaps seeing it return to us in more stable rates over time, especially with the variable rate. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. So, in principle, I think I personally would be in favor of it. That seems like prudent financial practice. I think for us, it's a little different if we're contemplating not utilizing, potentially not utilizing it through partial or full exit. But I think that's theoretical. I don't know if there's a way to recover that at some point. If you do some sort of exit, but I think that's kind of, I'm not sure how that would work out. So I'd look to Dan or somebody like that to do the calc on that, but, or Carl, but, and whether or not that's even an option, I think would be a big question. So.
That was definitely one of Dan's questions is if LPEA leaves Tri-State, will all or a portion of our load, are we entitled to any of the rate stabilization funds? So Dan, I don't think you have an answer. You just have that question too. Is that right? Yeah.
It's a good question.
Absolutely. Bob?
Yeah, I mean, in listening, could take some more thought, but it does not make sense to me to pay a higher rate in order to have rate stabilization. In comparing that to what we're doing, we're taking money out of margins to have rate stabilization. So it's not actually costing the consumer anymore to stabilize rates. They're getting a little less back in capital credits. If Tri-State were doing the same thing, we're getting a little less back in capital credits and we're stabilizing rates. That might make sense, but it's apples to oranges to me. To pay more in order to pay less in the future, I wouldn't want to do that. I want to pay less, as little as possible now, and on our end, stabilize rates with our mechanism. Because I don't really, frankly, I don't trust as much. If you pay Tri-State more money, where does that really want to go? I want to pay as little as possible and do the buffering on our end with our margins. My thoughts.
I don't think it's as apples and oranges as you stated, Bob. It's still, margins is profit, okay? So we're saying, okay, can we make fewer margins and keep a little bit of money for the future, which is exactly what we just did with LPEA. And we could give it this year to our members at LPEA if we did a last in, first out, which we have done in the very recent years. So it is money in our members' pockets in the same way this is money in Tri-State members' pockets. So I don't agree the apples and oranges, Bob, for what that's worth. I understand your concern, and you would rather not give it to Tri-State. We have elected Kohler to be our representative at Tri-State, and basically is do we trust the Tri-State board and our elected designee to the Tri-State board, Kohler, to make this happen? And I know it's hard. It's a hard trust thing to ask.
Well, sorry, but I thought your question was really just, do you want to do that? And I'm saying no. We both have different rationales and thoughts on that, but that doesn't make sense to me to pay more in order to pay less in the long run. And I trust Kohler 100%, but I don't trust the rest of the Tri-State board as far as I can throw them. There's my, so I don't want to give them more money. I know what we're doing with our money. I trust our board and trust our leadership. But so just, you can have a different opinion, but you asked, what do you think? Tell me what you want to do. That's what I would tell you to do, but I'm just one voice. So thank you.
That's your opinion, and then I took my opportunity to try to change your opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that cat going after your mouse there?
I thought that cat was in my house for a little bit. I've been hearing this meowing. I actually went around and looked. Did somebody leave the door open? Is that cat? Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, thanks, Bob. John Lee.
So that Bob doesn't just feel like he has one voice. I am completely on board with that. I feel like the question that Tim asked about, can we get a formulary to figure out what that would be like, how much money would be left on the table? Can we get a buyout of a partial rate adjustment stabilization plan? Seems too convoluted. And if we are going to have some costs, let's pay them as they're coming forward to us. And as uncomfortable as it's going to be, we're going to have more than one of those coming up in the next couple of years. So I am not in favor as Bob was.
Thank you, John Lee. Witzel?
I think if we're at the end of the conversation, I think John Lee covered most of my points. Do we have more to add to this?
Yeah,
or are we done?
So far I've heard from three. So
okay.
And since my job is to take your voice back to the whatever I need.
Okay,
I would like-
actually, I am going to step in here, and I am going to speak. And I want to sort of raise this issue. I don't believe that this is an appropriate forum for this level of discussion. This is supposed to be a report, and you're asking for a policy statement or a single voice. And this needs to be, if you want to agenda this and have a full discussion and do a deep dive, I'm all for that. I think that should come after we get a review and a statement by the staff, possibly a memo that we can all have a time to reflect on. But I don't think that this is an appropriate place in the agenda to continue this discussion. I'm open to being told otherwise by the rest of the board, but I do want to hit the pause button on a process and make sure that we want to keep going down this road.
Anybody have a comment before At this point, this is the only place we have to make this discussion. The questions were in the board package. Sent that board package in by last Friday when I was requested to. The question saying this is what we need to talk about was in there. I'm not sure how more to do this, sir.
I think the appropriate. So my recommendation here, and again, this is I'm trying to facilitate a conversation, not shove something down your throat. I think you're asking for a set of complicated. You're asking for the opinion of the board that is a multi-part, multifaceted discussion, and I would recommend that in January, if you want to do this and you think it's worthy of the board's attention, we agenda it as an individual line item with a specific driving towards a specific action, like what the Finance and Audit Committee did and what the Committee of Policies did, where they submitted some background data, chance to people reflect on it, leading towards a specific action. And that action in your particular case may simply be a straw poll. But I think the intention of the report section is to report on the activity, not to elicit a larger conversation. And again, I'm not trying to shove something down your throat. I'm trying to facilitate the proper forum here.
Thanks. I just have a quick question about timing. Do you need this decision or our straw poll this month, or can it wait till January?
Well, here's the
Good
deal.
comment.
Because of this accelerated pace that we're talking about of trying to get it to FERC by June 1, now we are looking at finalizing this for the board in March. So there are plans to be votes on specific portions of the rate structure next month. And what we were tasked with, and it was after, of course, the agenda went out for LPEA, because it was just this last week, was go back to your board, talk about this, and please come back with the sense from your board. So with not having talked about that, I will come back with a partial sense from the board. I heard 3 people say no, and I heard 9 people, and I heard me say yes, and I didn't hear from 8 people. So I can go with that.
Well, since I have the for a moment more, I'm opposed to it also. So I'm Bob and John.
So perhaps as a next step, rather than just sort of going down the line and interpreting people's comments, maybe you could ask staff to, or we rather could ask staff to prepare a memo on this, and that would give us a frame to react. And again to try to speak as one voice. Would that be constructive here? I'm trying to advance what you're trying to accomplish here, Kirsten.
So basically, take Dan's note here and put it in a memo. You see his note here?
We'd be happy to develop a memo and staff recommendation, if that's what you'd like.
Yeah, so so just to sort of drill in on that, I think, and step in here, Graham, of policy, at this moment in time, we can do an action item and say, hey, that we would and vote to instruct staff to prepare a memo for the next board meeting. And then that gives you a frame to work. That gives you, again, gives everybody a frame to provide the feedback that I think you're driving towards.
Graham?
Yeah, so if somebody wants to make a motion to delegate a staff investigation and a report to be prepared by the next regular board meeting or whatever date we need it by, the board can go ahead and present that motion now.
Or go ahead. Actually, sorry, Kirsten, why don't you keep driving the discussion?
Rachel?
Does that get you what you need in time, Kristen? I'm not quite sure the sequencing of our meeting rate stabilization.
No, it does not. But there still has to be a final vote on the entire thing. So it will be before March. So I guess that would be okay. It's just I'll either not be able to vote on this piece next month, or we'll figure that out.
Okay. Kohler, go ahead.
Yeah, Kirsten, I can't give you an answer of yes or no, because I'm just seeing so many different aspects that have consequences on other ones. I haven't seen enough to really feel comfortable saying, yeah, let's build, a pot of money on the side. Because I don't know right now. All I'm seeing is we need money to take care of the needs that we have today. I can't really answer it. I can't say yes or no with the knowledge that I have at this point. So I know that's not helpful, but that's kind of the point I'm coming from.
So I totally get it, and I appreciate that. And I think John has a good point. We'll discuss this at more detail. It would be zero for 2024 because there are no margins to be putting into deferred revenue. So, but you still have to have a place for it in your formula rate. You have to say, we're going to have a DSR of blah, 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 and then that will drive that. So you still have to have that in the rate, but again, it would be zero for 2024. So Tim and Dan, if you're wanting to, well, I don't know, you guys go ahead and talk. I don't want to get in the way of what John is doing, which is let's get off of a quote straw poll and let's talk about this next month. So if you guys have some other topic to talk about, then we're good. Tim?
So I guess my question is to have a better understanding a little bit. My assumption in sort of saying it's might be a prudent financial move is that Tri-State would go to a formulaic rate and that would be based upon a budget that later would be open to adjustment or true up, right? And my thought would be that if that was beyond a certain point to pay the costs under the rate design, that we would get that back in that period, right? If there was overage, or they could appeal or request or something for that to be used as a rate stabilization. But so I think my understanding is incomplete, which would kind of suggest, yeah, it needs a better discussion and a clear opportunity to understand what it is that we might be supporting or not support. So if that takes time, I suppose we would need to take that time to do so.
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question of doesn't it just happen in a true up, the answer is you can in your rate build a financial policy in it. You can say we don't want our equity ratio to be below this and we don't want our DSR to be below that. And when you are building your budget and your costs, then you determine that, and that will drive your revenue requirements, which drives your rate that will be put into that gets put into the formula. So it is still over and above any sort of a true up. It's a little wiggle room for the board. So it is a separate thing. And certainly, I would say probably 1/3 of the co-ops, the member co-ops, don't want any deferred revenue in it. They want it all right now. So we are not the minority in this. We may be the minority, but we're not the lone ranger out there. Dan?
Yeah, I don't have enough information to make a decision on this. I got your emails and I just assumed they'd be in the board packet, and I haven't seen any of this as of right now. I don't know why. But anyway, I'll move to direct staff to study this and give us a memo of the pros and cons of this for next board meeting.
Rachel
Great.
seconds.
Thank you. Okay, discussion on Dan's motion. Okay, all in favor, hold your hand up, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstained? Okay, thank you, Dan.
Let's
Kirsten?
talk about my report, if that motion is done, right?
It is, I'm sorry, you broke up there. Please repeat what you just said.
About my last, point number 4 of my report.
Terrific. Go ahead.
So one of the things when I talked about this, yeah, there's going to be this rate increase coming. In that, I said, well, the somewhat good news is it's not going to be as big for us as it would have been otherwise. And you can see this on page 4, and you can also see it in our Google Docs. There's an Excel spreadsheet that shows kind of, if we go with this new rate structure, what it would have looked like for us over the past 5 years, including in 2022. And we can see that our rates would have been lower in 2022 than they would have been if we don't make this rate change. So I just wanted to point that out to you. So that is the good news, is this is closer to best, but it's still not best. It's not totally cost equity. Any questions on my report?
You said that is in the Google Drive?
I'm sorry? Yeah, the LPXLS should be in the Google Drive. It should be, it's in there, and it's under board documents, Tri-State Rate Committee, 2022-12, and then LP.XLSS was one of them. I think it might come up funny if you try to bring it up as a Google Doc. You might want to download it and bring it up as Excel. Kohler, did I cover what you wanted me to cover, sir? Excellent. Thank you so much. And that's my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Fast track.
Yeah, I'm gonna save you all a lot of time. Because this meeting occurs on the same day this month as the fast track board meeting, and Ted and I would not be there, so there wouldn't be a quorum. So the fast track board meeting has not been held for December at this point. So I really don't have a lot to report. So we can move on. If any, on the other hand, if anyone has questions without the report, I'm happy to try and answer them for you. All right, let's move on.
Great. Thanks, Sam. CREA.
Great, thank you. The CREA board meeting was actually one of the most productive board meetings that I think I've ever attended. It felt really good. We got a lot of good discussions. CREA did have a couple of surveys that they held, and sorry, I'm in a shared room right now. Here. Anyway, CRA did have a couple of surveys, like how are we doing, you know, what do we need to change, so on and so forth, and had some of the best responses is what Mr. Singer was saying. This meeting was Brian Hannigan's last meeting as the president of the managers group. Mr. Dave Frick is going to be the next managers head honcho. I think that's all I really wanted to say. Oh, one last thing, the NRECA summer school will be held in Santa Fe at the end of July. So if anybody is interested in their CCD credits, it will be in Santa Fe this year. One of them will be in Santa Fe. Joe?
Yeah, Holly, can you talk a little bit more? You said it was really productive. Can you explain some of those details, what was productive and why it matters to us?
Yeah, thank you for that, Joe. Really, CRA is an interesting group, you know, because, you know, you got a very, very fine line that divides the group into ideologies. And so we spent a lot of time just trying to figure out, you know, how to bridge some of those gaps. And you know, there was an acknowledgement by the managers group that frustration almost that the CRA board has to start evolving and has to start moving forward. However, from my personal observation, you know, it's going to take a while for that to start really happening, I believe, but, you know, there is some pressure to, you know, start trying to figure out how we can all communicate better. Does that answer your question? It just felt really good. You know, it was a good discussion, we'll say. Miss Rachel?
Yeah, I was curious. It was interesting to see that the legislature that the PUC provided the legislature the update with the community choice. I guess it sounds like it wasn't recommendations, but just their impressions. I'm curious if you all discussed how in turn the legislature viewed that, because it seemed like the PUC was kind of, it didn't sound like it was the way to go. And I'm wondering if that's how the legislature perceived that.
Yeah, quite honestly, Rachel, we didn't dive deep into that at that point in time. Anybody else have any more questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you all.
Great, thank you. Okay, and Western United.
Western United did not have a meeting this month. Their next meeting is the end of January.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, that concludes the agenda. Any last comments?
I want to wish everybody a happy holiday.
Excellent.
Very much.
Here.
Yes, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. I think before we close, I think I want to take one moment here, and since I don't think we say it enough publicly, but I want to take a moment certainly, and I think I speak on behalf of the whole board, to say thank you to the staff for a great year. You guys have worked incredibly hard, and we really appreciate everything that you guys have done. It's been great. Speaking personally, it's been great working with all of you, and I'm super excited for next year. So again, thank you for everything you've done this year. So here. So
thanks for keeping the holiday lights on.
Yeah. So all right, we'll see you guys out and about.
Everybody. All right, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye bye.
Ho ho ho.
I know.